"They broke my body for fun," cried the poor widow to the mountain man. What he did next stunned everyone. Snow whips across a dying frontier town. The church bell tolls once, twice, and a woman stumbles into the dirt street, torn dress, eyes full of terror. From the shadows steps a scarred giant, a mountain man who's long since given up on mercy. Until this moment. He lifts her into his arms as the saloon doors creak open behind him, and the same men who broke her laugh like hyenas in the dark. But this time, justice rides on his back. As fires rise in the canyon and whispers spread through the town, some call him her savior, others say he's out for blood. Yet, when a hidden deed surfaces and powerful men close in, the truth threatens to burn them both. A past he buried, a crime they denied, a promise made before God and gunfire. Will his mercy save her, or destroy them both before the mountains see another dawn? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The spring sunlight beat down on Silver Mercy's dusty main street as Lucas Boone stood frozen, his weathered hat clutched in calloused hands. The crowd's laughter echoed off the whitewashed chapel walls, sharp as breaking glass. His scarred fingers tightened on the hat brim while he studied the 3 Richards sisters before him, their faces flushed but determined. Nettie May, the eldest, stood straight-backed as a fence post in her navy Sunday dress. Her brown eyes met his steadily, though her cheeks blazed red as sunset. Behind her, Mia Lou seemed to shrink into herself, her gentle face half hidden by the brim of her modest bonnet. Young Rosabelle shifted from foot to foot, her hands clasped tightly at her waist, but her chin lifted with defiance at the townspeople's continuing snickers. Lucas felt the weight of every stare boring into his back. 3 years of keeping to himself, of working iron in solitude while grief hardened around his heart like cooling metal, hadn't prepared him for this moment. The sister's father had been a good man, one of the few who'd treated Lucas with respect after the fire. But this... "The will's clear as creek water," Nettie May continued, her voice stronger now. "Papa wanted to ensure we'd be properly looked after. Said you were the most honorable man he knew." More titters from the crowd. Lucas heard someone whisper, "Crazy old Richards," and felt his jaw tighten. These girls deserved better than public mockery. "Perhaps," he said carefully, his voice rough from disuse. "We might discuss this somewhere more private." He gestured toward the livery stable where Cole waited, his mule's ears twitching at the commotion. The sisters exchanged glances. Mia Lou's hands twisted in her skirts, but she nodded slightly to Nettie May. Rosabelle already had gathered her skirts and started moving, practical as always despite her youth. As they walked away from the chapel, the crowd's attention slowly dispersed, though Lucas could still feel curious eyes following their progress. The stable's cool shadows welcomed them, smelling of hay and leather. Cole nickered softly in greeting. "I know it's sudden," Nettie May began, but Lucas held up one scarred hand. "Your father's will," he said quietly. "Tell me exactly what it says." His words came out clipped, but the sisters didn't flinch. Mia Lou spoke for the first time, her voice as soft as spring rain. "Papa left the ranch to all 3 of us, but..." She glanced at Nettie May for support. "But we can't inherit unless we're married," Rosabelle finished bluntly. "To you, Mr. Boone. Papa was specific about that part." Lucas leaned against a rough-hewn post, trying to make sense of it all. "Why me?" "He said you understood the land," Nettie May explained. "Said you had wisdom in your hands and honor in your heart, even if sorrow clouded your eyes." The words struck him like hammer blows. He remembered old Richards watching him work the forge, how they'd talk about weather patterns and soil conditions. The man had never pressed about the fire, never offered empty condolences. "And if I refuse?" he asked, though something in him already knew the answer. "The ranch goes to Cousin Herbert in Kansas City," Rosabelle said, her nose wrinkling. "He'd sell it piece by piece, first chance he got." Lucas studied each sister in turn. Nettie Mae, capable and strong, who'd managed the ranch since their father took sick. Mia Lou, whose gentle nature reminded him painfully of his Sarah. And Rosabelle, barely more than a girl, but with determination burning in her eyes. "It ain't right," he said finally. "Your father shouldn't have bound you this way." "Maybe not," Nettie Mae agreed. "But he loved that land like it was his fourth daughter, worked it for 40 years, built something from nothing." She stepped closer, her voice dropping. "We love it too, Mr. Boone. It's all we have." The stable was quiet, save for Cole's soft breathing and the distant church bells marking the hour. Lucas felt the weight of the moment pressing down like summer heat before a storm. These women needed him, not for himself, but for what he could provide. A name, protection, the right to keep their home. "I need time," he said at last. "Time to think." Relief flickered across their faces. It wasn't a no. Mia Lou's shoulders relaxed slightly, and Rosabelle actually smiled. "We understand," Nettie Mae said, "but we can't wait too long. Cousin Herbert's lawyer gave us until the end of spring." Lucas nodded, already turning toward Cole's stall. He needed to be alone, needed to think. The sisters seemed to sense this, gathering themselves to leave. "Mr. Boone?" Mia Lou's voice was barely above a whisper. He turned back, caught by the compassion in her eyes. "We know about your loss. We're not asking you to forget, just to help us keep our home." Something cracked in Lucas's chest. A hairline fracture in the wall he'd built around his grief. He managed a short nod before turning away again, his hands busy with Cole's saddle straps. He listened to their boot heels on the stable floor, the rustle of their skirts as they departed. Only when he was sure they were gone did he press his forehead against Cole's warm neck, breathing in the familiar scent of horse and leather. "What do you reckon, old friend?" he murmured. The mule's ear flicked back at his voice. "Seems the Lord ain't finished testing us yet." The supplies he'd come to town for lay forgotten. Instead, Lucas led Cole out into the spring sunshine, mounted up, and pointed them toward the mountain trail. He needed the solitude of his forge, the rhythm of hammer on anvil, to help him think through what had just happened. Behind him, Silver Mercy buzzed with fresh gossip, but Lucas barely heard it. His mind was already climbing the mountain, where the afternoon light would slant through his workshop window, and the only sounds would be iron striking iron and the steady beat of his thoughts. 3 sisters, 1 inheritance, and a choice that would change not just their lives, but his carefully constructed solitude forever. Lucas touched his heels to Cole's flanks, and they started the long climb home. The moment that had started with shocking boldness now settled into something more complex, a web of duty, need, and possibly redemption that Lucas couldn't yet fully understand. As Cole picked his way up the familiar trail, Lucas found himself remembering old Richards's words from years ago. "Sometimes, son, the Lord's mercy comes in forms we don't expect. Our job's just to recognize it when it arrives." He wasn't sure if this was mercy or madness, but he knew one thing. He had some serious thinking to do before he rode back down this mountain again. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Richards ranch as Lucas guided Cole down the rutted path. The weathered farmhouse stood proud, despite its peeling paint and missing shingles. A lone milk cow lowed softly in the side pasture, where patches of spring grass pushed through winter-dead earth. Lucas dismounted, his boots crunching on gravel. The house was neat despite its wear, window glass gleaming, porch swept clean. Someone had hung fresh curtains, bright against the faded clapboards. A morning glory vine climbed hopefully up a trellis, though it was too early for blooms. Before he could knock, the door opened. Nettie May stood there, her brown hair already escaping its practical bun. She'd traded yesterday's church dress for a work dress and apron, both patched but spotless. "Mr. Boone," she said, smoothing her apron. "We weren't sure you'd come." "Said I'd think on it." He removed his hat, revealing the silver threading through his dark hair. "Reckon I have." She stepped back, gesturing him inside. The main room was spare but tidy, with a few pieces of well-worn furniture arranged carefully to hide the worn spots in the rag rug. A family Bible held pride of place on the stone mantel, its leather covers softened by years of handling. Mia Lou emerged from the kitchen, flour dusting her arms. She gave a slight curtsy that made Lucas's chest ache. Sarah used to do the same, unconsciously graceful. Rosabelle clattered down the stairs moments later, her quick movements a contrast to her sister's restraint. "Please, sit," Nettie May offered, gesturing to the wooden rocker by the hearth. Lucas remained standing, his hat turning slowly in his scarred hands. "Your situation," he said carefully. "I need to understand it proper." Nettie May's shoulders straightened. "Papa died 3 months ago. The will reading was last week." She crossed to a small desk and withdrew a folded paper. "Everything goes to Cousin Herbert unless we're married by midsummer. To you, specifically." Lucas took the document, studying the precise legal language. "Why the deadline?" "Taxes coming due," Rosabelle supplied, "and Herbert's got plans to sell to the mining company that's buying up land hereabouts." Mia Lou's soft voice added, "We can't lose the ranch, Mr. Boone. It's all we have left of Papa." Lucas looked around the room again, seeing the signs of careful economy everywhere. Darned cushions, patched curtains, a broken chair mended with wire. But he also saw touches of beauty. Wildflowers in a cracked jar, a hand-stitched sampler, well-loved books lined up on a shelf. "Your father," he said slowly, "was a good man. Treated me fair when others didn't." He paused, weighing his next words carefully. "After the fire, after I lost Sarah and the baby, he never pressed for details. Just let me be." The sisters exchanged glances. Nettie May stepped forward, her face gentle. "Papa said you were an honorable man. Said you'd protect us if needed." Lucas moved to the window, staring out at the neglected fields. Good land, he thought, but needing work. More work than 3 women could manage alone, no matter how determined. "I'll marry all 3 of you," he said finally, still looking out the window. "In name only, for your safety and my conscience." A startled silence filled the room. He turned to face them, meeting each sister's gaze in turn. "You'll keep your home. I'll help with the heavy work, keep the books proper. But I won't." He swallowed hard. "I won't expect anything else. You'll be safe with me, I give you my word." Mia Lou's hand flew to her throat, while Rosabelle's eyes widened. Nettie May studied him intently, her practical nature asserting itself. "In name only," she repeated carefully. "You mean separate rooms," he said firmly. "I'll build myself a cabin out back, close enough if there's trouble. You'll have your privacy, your independence, just with legal protection." The sisters huddled together, whispering. Lucas waited patiently, understanding their need to confer. Finally, Nettie May turned back to him. "We accept," she said simply. "When?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll speak to Reverend Matthews today." He settled his hat back on his head. "If he agrees, We'll do it quiet-like, just witnesses and ceremony." Relief softened their faces, though uncertainty lingered in their eyes. What would this strange arrangement mean? How would they live as a family that wasn't truly a family? Lucas left them to their discussions, riding into town to speak with Reverend Matthews. The elderly preacher listened with growing concern as Lucas explained the situation. "It's highly irregular," Matthews protested, pacing his study. "3 sisters? And in name only? People will talk." "People already talk," Lucas said quietly. "Better they talk about this than watch 3 good women lose everything their father built." The Reverend sank into his chair, removing his spectacles to polish them thoughtfully. "You're sure about this? It's a heavy responsibility, Lucas. These girls will depend on you." "I'm sure." Lucas met the older man's gaze steadily. "It's what their father wanted. And maybe—" He hesitated. "Maybe it's what the Lord wants, too. A way to make something right after everything that went wrong." Finally, reluctantly, Matthews nodded. "Tomorrow morning, then. Early before the gossips are about. I'll arrange for witnesses." As dusk approached, Lucas made camp by the river behind the Richards house. He'd brought basic supplies: bedroll, coffee pot, some beans. The sisters had offered him a room for the night, but he'd declined. Better to ease into things slowly, he thought. The spring night was mild, with a gentle wind stirring the cottonwoods overhead. Lucas built a small fire and set water to boil for coffee. Then he knelt beside his bedroll, hands clasped, head bowed. "Lord," he whispered, "I don't rightly know if this is your will or just old man Richards' stubbornness, but these girls need help, and maybe—" His voice caught. "Maybe I need something too. Something to live for besides memories and regret. Show me how to do right by them, how to be what they need without—" He couldn't finish, but let the prayer trail into silence. Up in the farmhouse, 3 faces pressed against an upstairs window, watching the lonely figure by the fire. "He seems kind," Mia Lou whispered, her breath fogging the glass. "Kind or just lonely?" Rosabelle wondered, wrapping her shawl tighter. Nettie May said nothing, but her eyes never left the kneeling figure. She watched as Lucas finally rose, poured his coffee, and settled against a log. The night wind picked up, sending sparks spiraling from his fire into the darkness. "Whatever he is," she said at last, "he's offering us a chance to keep our home. Papa trusted him. We'll have to do the same." The sisters withdrew from the window, each lost in her own thoughts about the morning to come. Below, Lucas sipped his coffee and watched the stars emerge, wondering if somewhere Sarah was watching too. Would she understand? Would she forgive him for this strange new path he was choosing? The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, offering no answers. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, there was only the river's soft song, the crackling fire, and the weight of decisions that would change all their lives. Dawn painted the chapel windows with pale gold light as townspeople filed inside, their Sunday best hastily donned for this most unusual wedding. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of curiosity as much as bodies. Reverend Matthews stood at the altar, his weathered face grave as he arranged his Bible and papers. Lucas Boone waited alone at the front, his tall frame uncomfortable in a freshly brushed coat that couldn't quite hide the work-worn seams. His scarred hands clasped and unclasped behind his back, the only sign of his nerves. A murmur rippled through the gathering as the Richards sisters entered. They wore their best dresses, faded but clean, with fresh ribbons at their throats. Nettie May led the way, her spine straight as a fence post. Rosabelle followed, chin lifted against the whispers. Mia Lou came last, her eyes downcast but her steps steady. "Shameful business," someone muttered from the back pews. "3 wives, even in name only. Ain't natural." "Hush now," came another voice. "They ain't got no choice, poor things." Reverend Matthews cleared his throat, silencing the whispers. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying to the rafters, "we are gathered here today in the sight of God to join these 4 souls in holy matrimony." He paused, his stern gaze sweeping the congregation. "Let me be clear. Though unusual, this ceremony creates bonds as sacred as any other marriage. The Lord's blessing falls on all unions made in faith and honor, whether—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Whether they be fully expressed or not." A few snickers echoed from the back. Lucas's jaw tightened, but he kept his eyes forward, focused on the cross above the altar. The ceremony itself was brief. 3 times Lucas spoke his vows. 3 times a sister responded. When Mia Lou's soft "I do" faded into silence, someone in the crowd whispered, "Boone's lost his wits for certain." "By the authority vested in me," Reverend Matthews concluded, "I now pronounce you man and wives. Mr. Boone, you may step back." Lucas nodded once, sharply. No kisses were exchanged, no rings given. Just 4 signatures on the marriage certificate, witnessed by the preacher and his wife. The newly made family filed out into the morning sun. Lucas helped each sister into his wagon, ignoring the stares and whispers of the dispersing crowd. The wooden bench creaked as he settled beside Nettie May, taking up the reins. "Reckon we're legal now," he said quietly. The sisters nodded, their faces a mix of relief and apprehension as the wagon lurched forward. The journey home proved long and difficult. Spring meltwater had turned the ridge road into a rutted challenge, forcing Lucas to guide the horses, with careful patience. Every bump sent shivers through the wagon's wooden frame, making the sisters clutch at their seats and each other. "Watch that hole there," Lucas warned, steering around a particularly deep rut. "Water's been having its way with this trail." 2 hours passed in slow progress. The sun climbed higher, burning off the morning mist as they ascended. Mia Lou began humming softly, an old hymn about guidance and protection. The familiar tune seemed to ease something in all of them. Finally, the wagon rolled into the ranch yard. Lucas helped each sister down, his touch respectful and brief. "Best get inside," he said, glancing at gathering clouds. "Got some things to say before the weather turns." They gathered in the main room, the sisters perching uncertainly on chairs, while Lucas remained standing. The afternoon light filtered through dusty windows, catching motes in its beams. "Need to set some rules," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "for everyone's peace of mind." He looked at each sister in turn. "We'll share meals. Breakfast at dawn, supper at sunset. Work needs sharing too. I'll handle the heavy labor, but everyone pulls their weight." Nettie May nodded approvingly. "That's only fair." "About sleeping arrangements." Lucas paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'll take the old tack room out back, fix it up proper. You ladies keep your rooms up here. No one enters another's sleeping space without permission and good reason." "We understand," Rosabelle said softly. "You're being more than fair, Mr. Boone." "Lucas," he corrected gently. "Reckon we should use first names, being family now." The word family hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and memory. Mia Lou's fingers worried at her apron strings. Will you take supper with us tonight? To start as we mean to go on?" Lucas nodded, something in her shy question touching a long buried place in his heart. "I'll just see to the horses first." The evening settled into an almost ordinary rhythm. The sisters prepared a simple meal while Lucas tended to outdoor chores. When he returned, They sat together at the scrubbed wooden table, heads bowed, as Nettie Mae said, "Grace." After the dishes were cleared, Lucas noticed a broken chair in the corner. Without comment, he fetched his tools from the wagon and began working on it, the familiar motions of repair settling his thoughts. Mia Lou sat nearby, mending a worn tablecloth while she hummed that same hymn from earlier. The gentle melody mixed with the sound of his work, the rasp of sandpaper, the tap of hammer on nail. But as evening deepened, the scent of pine smoke drifted in through the window. Lucas's hands faltered on the chair. The smell took him back 3 years, to another night, another home, to Sarah's screams, to flames that marked both flesh and memory. He set down his tools carefully, controlling his breathing. "Excuse me," he managed, and stepped outside into the gathering dark. The night air was cool on his face as he tilted his head back, studying the stars appearing one by one. Behind him, the cabin glowed with lamplight, warm and alive with the sounds of his new family settling in for the night. Before him stretched the shadows of the land they would work together. The grief rose in his throat, familiar as breathing. He pressed one hand against the rough cabin wall, anchoring himself in the present moment. The past was past. These women needed him now, needed his strength and protection. He couldn't let old sorrows keep him from doing right by them. Inside, Mia's voice lifted in another hymn, sweet and clear in the evening quiet. The melody drifted out to where Lucas stood, not chasing away his memories, but somehow making them easier to bear. The pine smoke faded on the breeze, leaving only the clean scent of spring earth and promising rain. Lucas straightened his shoulders, gathering his composure before turning back to the warmth and light of the cabin. Dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Lucas Boone stepped out of the converted tack room. His boots crunched on the gravel as he made his way to the barn, pausing to breathe in the crisp morning air. The ranch was quiet except for the distant call of meadow larks and the soft nickering of horses waiting for their morning feed. Inside the main house, a lamp flickered to life. Lucas watched as Nettie Mae's silhouette moved past the window, already up to start breakfast. A smile tugged at his weathered face. The eldest Richard's sister matched his own dedication to early rising. The forge he'd begun building beside the barn was taking shape nicely. Lucas ran his hand along the rough stones of the half-finished wall, mentally plotting the day's work. The familiar scent of coal and iron shavings clung to his clothes, a comfort in this new life. "Morning, Lucas," Nettie Mae called, crossing the yard with 2 steaming cups. She'd taken to bringing him coffee before their forge lessons, a kindness that still surprised him. "Thought we might get an early start today." He accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "Much obliged. Reckon you're ready to try some actual hammering this morning?" "Been waiting on it," she replied, eyes bright with anticipation. Despite her initial uncertainty about learning smithing, Nettie Mae had proven an eager student. As the sun climbed higher, Lucas guided Nettie Mae's hands on the hammer, showing her how to strike true. "Like this," he demonstrated, the metal singing under his sure blows. "Let the weight do the work." Nettie Mae's first attempts were hesitant, but she soon found her rhythm. The ringing of her hammer joined his in a steady cadence that echoed across the yard. When she successfully shaped her first horseshoe, her face glowed with pride. "Well done," Lucas praised quietly. "You've got a natural feel for it." Inside the house, Mia Lou was already at work in the garden, her slim figure bent over the newly turned earth. She had a gentle touch with growing things, coaxing life from the soil with patient care. The morning sun caught in her hair as she planted the season's first peas. Rosabelle moved between house and barn, managing her own morning tasks. Her clear voice carried snatches of hymns as she milked their cow and gathered eggs. She had a way of making even the simplest chores seem lighter, her natural cheer infectious. Days fell into a comfortable pattern. Lucas found himself adapting to the presence of others after so long alone. The sound of women's voices, the smell of fresh bread, the sight of curtains in windows, small touches that transformed his duty into something warmer. The ranch itself seemed to respond to their combined care. Broken fences were mended, the barn received a fresh coat of paint, and flowers began to bloom in Mia's carefully tended beds. Even the old house stood straighter, as if drawing strength from its new inhabitants. One Sunday afternoon, they received their first visitor. Mrs. Matthews, the preacher's wife, arrived carrying a basket of fresh flour and concerned eyes. Lucas met her at the gate, conscious of his work-stained clothes. "Afternoon, Mrs. Matthews," he greeted, helping her down from her buggy. "Mr. Boone," she nodded, clutching her basket. "I thought the ladies might need some extra provisions." Her expression turned serious. "And I felt I should warn you. There's talk in town. Cruel talk." The sisters gathered on the porch, their faces falling at her words. Lucas stepped forward, positioning himself between them and the messenger of bad news. "What kind of talk?" Nettie May asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. Mrs. Matthews sighed. "The usual small-minded nonsense. Questions about propriety. Suggestions that aren't fit to repeat in decent company." She squared her shoulders. "My husband has spoken against it from the pulpit, but you know how people can be." Lucas felt the sisters' discomfort like a physical thing. "Much obliged for the warning," he said evenly, "and the flour, but we don't put much stock in gossip up here." After Mrs. Matthews left, however, Lucas found himself brooding over her words. He watched the sisters going about their evening chores, their heads held high despite the weight of town judgment. These good women deserved better than whispered scandal. That night, rain began to fall, drumming against the roof in a steady rhythm. Thunder rolled in the distance, making the window panes rattle. Lucas sat in his chair by the fire, the family Bible open in his hands. "Would you read to us?" Mia asked softly, looking up from her mending. "It helps, somehow, hearing scripture in your voice." Lucas cleared his throat, turning to Proverbs. His voice, though quiet, filled the room with strength as he read, "Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it." The sisters drew closer as thunder crashed overhead, finding comfort in the familiar words and his steady presence. Rosabelle worked on her quilting, needle flashing in the firelight. Nettie May shelled peas into a bowl, her movements peaceful and unhurried. Mia's hands stilled on her mending as she listened, her face softened by the lamp's glow. The storm raged outside, but within their circle of lamplight, they found shelter in each other's company. Lucas read on, his deep voice a anchor in the darkness. "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things." When the last prayer was said, and the sisters had retired upstairs, Lucas stood at the window, watching the rain. Their unusual family might raise eyebrows in town, but here, in this moment, it felt right. They were building something true, if unconventional. Morning broke clear and bright. The storm washed away. Sunlight streamed through windows that sparkled with recent cleaning, casting warm patterns on the swept floor. Lucas paused in the doorway, struck by the scene before him. Nettie May stood at the stove, humming as she stirred a pot of porridge. Rosabelle set the table while Maya arranged fresh wildflowers in a jar. The simple domestic scene caught at his heart. This was peace. Hard won, but real. The sisters looked up at his entrance, their faces open and welcoming. No shame clouded their eyes, no fear darkened their expressions. Whatever the town might say, they had found their dignity here, in work and faith and quiet respect. "Breakfast's ready," Nettie May announced, her voice warm with belonging. Lucas took his place at the table, bowing his head as she offered grace. Outside, another day waited with its demands and challenges. But here, in this moment, they were family, bound not by passion or convention, but by something deeper and more lasting. The morning sun caught the fresh flowers on the table, turning ordinary daisies into something fine. Like their unlikely household, beauty could grow in unexpected places, defying those who would judge what they couldn't understand. Mid-April painted the hills in soft greens and scattered wildflowers across the meadows. Lucas stood at the forge, teaching Nettie May the art of tempering steel, when hoofbeats echoed up the ridge road. 3 riders approached, their mounts well-groomed and expensive. The leader caught everyone's attention immediately. His black broadcloth coat and polished boots marked him as a city man, someone used to boardrooms rather than barnyards. Behind him, 2 younger men in clerk's attire carried leather document cases and rolled maps. Lucas set down his hammer, noting how the stranger's eyes swept across their property with calculating interest. Beside him, Nettie May straightened her work apron, her expression wary. "Good morning," the man called out, reining his horse to a stop. "I'm looking for the owners of this ranch." His smile was practiced, pleasant, but somehow empty. "Gordon Alden, Denver and Rio Grande Railroad." Rosabelle and Mia emerged from the house, drawn by the shoe, visitors. Lucas stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of his wives. "I'm Lucas Boone. This is our property." "Excellent." Alden dismounted with fluid grace. "Might we discuss some business over tea? It's rather important." Nettie May's hospitality training took over despite her obvious unease. "Of course. Please, come inside." The kitchen seemed to shrink with the addition of their visitors. Mia poured tea into their best cups, while Rosabelle set out the last of their sugar cookies. Mr. Alden sat at their table as if it were his own office, spreading maps across the worn wood. "You see," he began, tracing lines with one manicured finger, "the railroad is planning a spur line through this valley. Your property sits at a crucial junction point." His tone remained cordial, but his eyes were sharp. "We'll need to verify full ownership before proceeding with any formal discussions." Nettie May's hands trembled slightly as she set down the teapot. "We have all our papers in order, Mr. Alden. Father was very particular about documentation." "The will, Nettie," Lucas said quietly. "Best show him everything." While Nettie May retrieved their father's will from its tin box, Lucas watched Alden. The railroad man sipped his tea with perfect manners, but something in his manner put Lucas in mind of a wolf in fine clothing. Alden accepted the documents, scanning them with practiced efficiency. His brow furrowed, and he pulled a small magnifying glass from his vest pocket to study certain passages more closely. The silence stretched thin as a wire. Finally, he looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "This presents a problem, I'm afraid." He tapped one particular paragraph. "Without a blood heir born under the Boone name, this deed becomes invalid after July." The sisters exchanged alarmed glances. Mia's face went pale, while Rosabelle gripped the back of her chair so hard her knuckles whitened. "That can't be right," Nettie May protested. "Father wanted to ensure the land stayed in the family. That's why he arranged the marriage clause." Alden's smile held no warmth. "The marriage was only part of the requirement, Mrs. Boone. Your father's will specifically states that a male heir must be born to carry on the Boone name, or the property reverts to territorial custody." He carefully refolded the will. "Without such an heir by summer's end, I'm afraid your claim becomes void." Lucas felt anger rising in his chest like forge heat. The careful legal trap hidden in the will's language, Alden's too convenient timing, none of it felt like coincidence. "We'll need to review your railroad's claims," Lucas said, keeping his voice level through sheer will, "and consult with our own legal counsel." "Of course." Alden rose smoothly, gathering his maps. "My clerks and I will camp by the creek tonight. We have several other properties to survey tomorrow." He paused at the door, looking back. "Do consider selling now. It would be so much simpler." After their unwelcome visitors departed, the kitchen felt hollow. Lucas watched smoke rise from Alden's campfire down by the creek, curling against the darkening sky like a warning. "He's trying to pressure us," Nettie Mae said, her voice tight with worry, "using Father's own words against us." Lucas nodded grimly. "Reckon so. Railroad companies are known for such tactics." "But what can we do?" Mia's question hung in the air like morning frost. "First, we look at every paper we've got," Lucas answered. "There might be something we missed." They gathered around the kitchen table as evening deepened, spreading out every document the family owned. Land grants, tax receipts, letters, and treaties, some dating back to when the territory was first settled. Lamplight cast their shadows long against the walls as they searched for any legal hope. Rosabelle sat quietly through most of their discussion, her usually bright spirit subdued. As Lucas studied yet another document, her whisper broke the silence. "You're going to give us sons." The words echoed her first declaration in town, but now they carried a weight of desperate truth rather than challenge. Lucas looked up, meeting her eyes across the table. "That wasn't our agreement," he said gently. "Agreements change when need drives them," Nettie Mae responded, her voice steady despite her flushed cheeks. "We're asking you to consider it, Lucas. Not demanding, but asking." Through the window, smoke from Alden's camp traced dark patterns against the twilight sky. Lucas felt the weight of 3 women's hopes pressing against his scarred conscience. The promise he'd made, marriage in name only, had seemed the only honorable choice. Now honor pulled him in different directions, like a piece of iron that needed reshaping. "We should sleep on it," he finally said. "Clear heads might see solutions we're missing tonight." The sisters nodded, though their faces showed varying degrees of disappointment and worry. As they cleared away the papers, Lucas stepped outside to check on the stock. The night air carried a hint of pine smoke from Alden's camp, reminding him that their peaceful routine had just been shattered. He looked back at the house, warm light spilling from its windows. In just a few months, it had become more of a home than he'd known since losing his first family. The thought of Alden's railroad cutting through their land, of these good women being forced out, it stirred something fierce in his chest. "We'll find another way," he said aloud, making it a promise to the night air. But even as the words left his mouth, he wondered what that way might be, and whether any of them were ready for the changes it might require. The week after Alden's unwelcome visit dawned clear and cool. Spring winds swept down from the mountains, carrying the scent of melting snow and new grass. Lucas rose before the sun, as always, but noticed the sisters were already up. Their shadows moved behind the kitchen, curtains, as they prepared for another long day of work. Nettie Mae stepped onto the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in each hand. "Thought you might need this," she said, offering one to Lucas. "We've got a heap of work ahead." He accepted the cup with a nod of thanks. The coffee was strong and sweet, just as he liked it. "Fence line needs mending on the north pasture," he said. "Winter's been hard on the posts." "We'll help," she replied firmly. "All of us." They worked from sunrise to sunset, clearing winter's debris from the fields and replacing rotted fence posts. Mia and Rosabelle gathered fallen branches, while Nettie Mae and Lucas worked the post hole digger. The physical labor helped ease their worries about the railroad, if only for moments at a time. When the sun reached its peak, they paused for a simple lunch of bread and dried apple slices. Lucas had set up his portable forge near the fence line, planning to straighten some bent nails for reuse. Mia offered to fetch his tools from the barn. "Much obliged," he said softly, watching her hurry back toward the buildings. Mia returned, carefully balancing a heavy pail of nails and Lucas's tool roll. Her foot caught on a root, and the pail tipped. Nails scattered across the packed earth like silver rain. "Oh!" she exclaimed, cheeks flushing pink. "I'm so clumsy." Lucas was beside her in 2 strides, kneeling to help gather the spilled nails. "No harm done," he assured her. Their hands met, reaching for the same nail, and both froze. Her fingers were warm against his work-roughened palm. The moment stretched like honey dripping from a spoon. Mia's breath caught slightly, and Lucas found himself noticing how the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in her brown hair. Neither moved to break the contact. A meadowlark's song broke the spell. Lucas cleared his throat and pulled his hand back, gathering the remaining nails quickly. Mia busied herself brushing dust from her skirt, her cheeks still pink. That evening, Rosabelle prepared a simple supper of cornbread and beans. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with baking bread. As they ate, she glanced between Mia and Lucas with barely contained amusement. "Sister dear," Rosabelle said, her eyes twinkling, "you've been awful quiet tonight. Wouldn't have anything to do with turning red as a sunset out by the forge today, would it?" Mia ducked her head, but not before they all saw her blush return. "I was just embarrassed about dropping the nails," she murmured. "Is that all?" Rosabelle pressed. "Because from where I stood, it looked like—" "Rosabelle," Nettie Mae warned, but there was a smile in her voice too. Lucas kept his eyes on his plate, but the corners of his mouth lifted slightly, the first real smile they'd seen from him. The expression transformed his usually solemn face, softening the worry lines around his eyes. After supper, the sisters gathered around the table with colorful fabric scraps and batting. "We're making quilts to sell in town," Nettie Mae explained when Lucas raised an eyebrow. "Every little bit helps, and winter's coming again before we know it." He watched them work for a moment, their fingers quick and sure with needle and thread. Rosabelle hummed as she stitched, a habit that had once irritated him, but now felt as natural as crickets chirping at dusk. The next morning brought Henry Nez riding up to the forge where Lucas worked. The Ute Scout sat straight and dignified in his saddle, his dark eyes taking in everything about the property. "Your horse needs new shoes," Lucas said by way of greeting, noting the wear on the animal's hooves. Henry dismounted smoothly. "That he does, friend. But first we must speak of other things." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a wrapped package. "Venison. My brother's hunt was good." Lucas set down his hammer and wiped his hands. "Come have coffee," he said, gesturing toward the house. They walked together, their boots raising small puffs of dust. Inside, Mia poured coffee for both men, while Henry spoke quietly about what he'd seen. "Railroad men are marking trees near the creek," he reported. "Yellow paint on the north side. They mark boundaries this way, preparing for what they call progress." His tone carried centuries of weary knowledge about broken promises. Lucas's hands tightened around his cup. "How many markers?" 12 that I counted. They work at night sometimes, thinking no one watches. Henry's gaze was steady. "My people know about land being marked for taking. Be careful, friend." "Much obliged for the warning," Lucas said. He meant it. Henry had proved a true friend these past months, bringing game when hunting was good, and news when trouble stirred. They finished their coffee in companionable silence. Then Lucas led Henry's horse to the forge and began crafting new shoes, heating and shaping the iron with practiced skill. The rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil filled the air while Henry watched, occasionally offering a quiet word of appreciation for the craftsmanship. As the sun began its westward slide, Lucas finished the last shoe. Henry mounted up, testing his horse's new footwear with obvious approval. "Good work," he said simply. "Watch the creek line." With a slight nod, he turned his horse toward the trail that would take him back to his people's camp. Lucas watched him go, then walked to his small desk in the corner of the forge. Paper was precious, but this couldn't wait. By lamplight, he carefully wrote a letter to the county clerk, requesting clarification of territorial land law and inheritance requirements. His hand, more used to hammer than pen, formed each letter with deliberate care. The evening settled around him like a blanket, bringing with it the first cool breath of night air. From the house came the sound of the sisters singing while they worked on their quilts. Lucas sealed his letter and set it aside to post next time he went to town. Movement caught his eye. Mia crossing, the yard with a shawl drawn around her shoulders. She paused at the forge door. "We saved you some supper," she said softly. Lucas nodded, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. As they walked back to the house together, their steps fell naturally into the same rhythm. Neither spoke, but the silence felt comfortable, like a well-worn saddle or a favorite shirt. Inside, Rosabelle was showing Nettie Mae a quilt square she'd finished, a star pattern in shades of blue and gold. They looked up as Lucas and Mia entered, but no one teased this time. Instead, they simply made space at the table, passing him a plate of still warm food. The railroad's threat still loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now, in the lamp-lit kitchen, with the smell of coffee and the quiet sounds of needle through fabric, they had found a moment of peace. Lucas ate his supper and listened to the sisters talk about their quilting plans, letting their gentle conversation wash over him like a healing balm. 10 days crept by like molasses in winter. Every morning, Lucas watched for the postal rider while he worked at his forge, hoping for news from the county clerk. The sisters tried to keep busy with their quilting and spring planting, but worry hung over the ranch like morning fog. When the rider finally appeared, his horse's hooves kicked up dust along the ridge road. Lucas met him at the gate, his heart hammering against his ribs. The official envelope felt heavy in his calloused hands. Inside the kitchen, the sisters gathered around the scarred wooden table as Lucas broke the seal. His eyes moved across the formal writing, and his shoulders slumped. "It ain't good news," he said quietly. Mia's hands trembled as she took the letter. She read aloud, her voice growing thicker with each word. According to territorial statute, the inheritance clause requires a blood heir or legally adopted child bearing the Boone name before the first day of July. Without such heir, the property reverts to state control for railroad use. Tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Nettie Mae wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, while Rosabelle paced the kitchen like a caged bird. 3 months, Rosabelle whispered. That's all we have left. Lucas stood at the window, staring out at the land they'd worked so hard to save. The spring grass was already greening up, and the garden showed tiny sprouts breaking through the soil. His throat felt tight. He'd failed them, just as he'd failed to protect his first family. "The Lord ain't abandoned us yet," he said finally, though his voice was rough. We'll keep praying for guidance." That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the yard, a commotion erupted near the house. Rosabel's startled cry brought Lucas running from the forge. He found her by the front porch, cradling something black and feathered in her apron. "It's hurt," she said, showing him the crow that had fallen from the eaves. One wing drooped at an odd angle, and its dark eyes were glazed with pain. Lucas gentled his big hands as he examined the bird. "Wings broken, but clean. Might heal if we can keep it still." Mia appeared with strips of clean cloth, while Nettie May brought a box lined with soft rags. Together they watched as Lucas carefully splinted the wing using thin pieces of kindling and the cloth strips. The crow remained surprisingly calm under his touch, as if it knew they meant to help. "We ought to name it," Rosabel decided, settling the bird in its makeshift nest. "Something holy, since it fell right into my apron like a gift from above." She thought for a moment. "St. Peter, that's what we'll call him." "Seems awful formal for a crow," Lucas said, but his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. "Well, he came down from heaven, didn't he?" Rosabel smiled through her own tears from earlier. "Just like the real St. Peter, he needs healing and faith." Over the next days, St. Peter became part of their household. The crow showed remarkable spirit, hopping about on one foot while keeping its splinted wing carefully tucked. It followed Rosabel everywhere, especially when she carried food. Soon it discovered the forge, where Lucas worked from sunup to sundown. The bird would perch on the anvil's horn, watching intently as Lucas shaped hot iron. Sometimes it picked up small bits of wire or nails, arranging them in neat rows. Its presence brought unexpected lightness to their days of uncertainty. Spring finally claimed the mountain fully. The last patches of snow melted from the ridge, leaving the earth soft and ready for planting. They worked harder than ever, Lucas with his blacksmithing, the sisters with their quilts and garden. Each evening brought bone-deep weariness, but also small moments of peace as they gathered for supper. One Sunday night, after a simple meal of beans and cornbread, they sat together in the parlor. St. Peter hopped between them, occasionally preening Rosabel's skirt with his beak. The Bible lay open on Lucas's knee, but he hadn't yet begun to read. "Maybe we should pray special tonight," Mia suggested softly. "As a family." Lucas nodded, removing his hat. The sisters joined hands, forming a circle that included him. The lamplight cast warm shadows on their faces as Lucas began to pray. "Lord," he said, his deep voice gentle, "we ain't asking for miracles, just guidance through this valley. Show us your path when our own eyes fail us. Give us strength to trust your timing, even when fear crowds close. And thank you for the small blessings, this roof, this land, and even this contrary crow that reminds us of your care for all creatures." Just as he finished speaking, St. Peter let out a loud, clear caw that echoed through the quiet room. The unexpected sound startled them all. Then Rosabel began to giggle. Soon they were all laughing, even Lucas, while tears of mirth mixed with those of worry. "Well, I reckon that's what you call a heavenly affirmation," Nettie May said, wiping her eyes. "Or maybe he's just hungry again," Mia added, which set them laughing once more. The crow hopped onto Lucas's shoulder and began investigating his shirt buttons with great interest. Looking at the bird's healing wing, Lucas felt a spark of hope kindle in his chest. If this broken creature could mend and find joy again, perhaps their situation wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. Outside, the spring night was filled with the song of crickets and the distant call of a whippoorwill. Stars pricked through the darkening sky like pinpricks in black velvet. Inside, the lamp burned steady and warm, illuminating their small circle of faith and family. St. Peter settled himself comfortably on the back of Rosabel's chair, tucking his healing wing close. His bright eyes watched them all with what seemed like contentment. The sisters began quietly discussing their plans for tomorrow's work, their voices carrying the same thread of hope that had brought them through every challenge so far. Lucas listened to them talk, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his shoulders but no longer crushing. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Sometimes, he realized, the Lord's answers came not in grand gestures, but in small signs, like a wounded crow finding shelter among the broken-hearted, teaching them all how to heal. The late May sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard when Henry Nez rode up on his paint horse. Lucas paused his work at the forge, wiping soot from his hands as the Ute scout dismounted with fluid grace. Henry's usually calm face held an edge of concern. "Brother," Henry said quietly, reaching into his leather satchel. "News from the agency came today." He withdrew an official envelope, its government seal still intact. "It concerns your land." Lucas's heart tightened. He called toward the house, and the sisters emerged onto the porch, their faces anxious. They gathered around the wooden table outside as Henry broke the seal and unfolded the letter. "The Bureau of Indian Affairs has reviewed recent railroad surveys," Henry read carefully. "A portion of Boone Ridge falls within boundaries established by the 1868 treaty with the Ute Nation. This creates complications regarding the Denver and Rio Grande's claim to the property." Nettie May leaned forward. "Does this help us keep the ranch?" "It means the railroad's claim isn't as simple as they pretend," Henry explained. "The treaty promised partnership between settlers and tribes, not theft by railway companies." His dark eyes held ancient sorrow. "My father signed that agreement, believing in honest words." Lucas studied the failing light. "You've ridden far today. Stay the night. We've got a clean bunk in the barn." The sisters hurried to add extra portions to the evening meal, while Lucas and Henry tended to the horses. Soon they gathered around the fire pit, where Lucas often worked his iron. The flames painted their faces with warmth as crickets began their evening songs. Henry sat cross-legged, his manner dignified but relaxed. "My grandfather knew this ridge when buffalo still grazed here," he said, accepting a tin cup of coffee from Mia. "He told me how the first white settlers came, not with guns, but with offers of trade and shared hunting grounds." Rosabel wrapped her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "What changed?" "Gold fever. Railroad fever." Henry's voice held no bitterness, only truth. "Men forgot their promises when silver and iron rails became more valuable than honor." Lucas stared into the flames, remembering his own broken promises, to protect, to cherish, to keep safe. The fire that took his family had started so small, just a spark from his workshop. If he'd only checked one last time before bed. "The agency has original treaty maps," Henry continued. "We should compare them to the railroad survey. I can guide you there tomorrow." Lucas nodded slowly. "How far?" "Half-day's ride north. We'll need to camp one night." The sisters exchanged glances. "We'll manage things here," Nettie May assured them. "This might be our best chance to save the ranch." Dawn found Lucas and Henry riding out, their horses' hooves raising small clouds of dust on the trail. They traveled mostly in comfortable silence, two men accustomed to the rhythm of wilderness. Around midday, they passed through a narrow canyon where ancient pictographs marked the red stone walls. Henry gestured to the paintings. "My people's story of this land. Every mark has meaning, about seasons, hunting grounds, sacred places." He smiled faintly. "Your kind prefer paper maps." "Paper burns easier," Lucas said quietly. "Stone remembers." They reached the agency post by late afternoon. The clerk was reluctant to share documents until Henry spoke firmly in both English and Ute, reminding him of treaty obligations. Finally, they spread the maps across a rough wooden table, comparing boundaries. "See here," Henry pointed. "The railroad survey ignores these marker stones. They've drawn their line straight through sacred ground." Lucas traced the ridge line with his finger. "This could help us prove their claim is false." As sunset approached, they made camp in a meadow alongside other travelers, mostly freight wagons bound for mining camps. They shared coffee and jerky around a small fire, watching the sky deepen to purple. Then the night lit up with ribbons of green and gold, the northern lights dancing across the stars. The wagoners fell silent in wonder. Lucas and Henry sat apart from the others, their faces illuminated by the celestial display. "Sometimes I wake thinking I hear her screaming," Lucas said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My wife. The night of the fire. I was working late at the forge, forgot to bank the coals proper." His hands clenched. "By the time I woke, the workshop was blazing. It spread so fast." Henry listened without interruption, his eyes on the shifting lights above. "I got the door open, but the smoke," Lucas's voice cracked. "I could hear them, but I couldn't reach them. My hands still show the burns from trying." The aurora rippled across the sky like a spirit banner. Henry was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "You are still alive for a reason," he said simply. "The Creator does not preserve us without purpose." Lucas looked at his scarred hands. "What purpose could come from such loss?" "Perhaps to help 3 sisters keep their home," Henry suggested. "Perhaps to stand with my people against dishonest men. The path reveals itself one step at a time." They sat in silence then, watching the lights dance until sleep called them. The next morning they rode home with the treaty maps carefully stored in Henry's satchel, physical proof of promises made and broken, but also of the possibility of justice. When they reached the ranch, the sisters were waiting with fresh bread and questions. Lucas let Henry explain what they'd learned while he unsaddled the horses, his mind still full of starlight and ancient promises painted on stone. Something had shifted during their journey, a bond formed between 2 men from different worlds, united by respect for the land and a shared sense of right. As Henry prepared to leave, Lucas gripped his arm in friendship. "Much obliged for your help," he said quietly. Henry's dark eyes held understanding. "We walk this path together now, brother. The land remembers its true guardians." Lucas watched him ride away, then turned back to the forge. There was iron to shape, and hope burned hotter than before. The sisters' voices drifted from the house, mixing with bird song and the distant cry of a hawk. This land held many stories. Perhaps there was still time to write one of justice. The wagon rattled down the mountain path, every jolt making the precious documents in Lucas's saddlebag crinkle. His mind kept returning to the maps and treaties Henry had shown him at the agency post. Finally, solid proof that could save their home. As they rounded the last bend, the Richards Ranch came into view. The sisters stood on the porch, their faces anxious. Lucas pulled the wagon to a stop, and Henry's paint horse nickered a greeting to the family mare. "Well," Nettie Mae called out, unable to contain herself any longer. Lucas climbed down, his boots raising small clouds of dust. "The railroad's claim is false," he announced, his voice steady but carrying an unfamiliar note of triumph. "There's an old treaty clause that shows this land belongs jointly to the Boone family and the Ute people." The sisters' joy burst forth like spring water. Rosabelle clasped her hands in prayer while Mia's eyes brimmed with grateful tears. Nettie Mae rushed forward to hug Henry, then stopped herself, blushing at the impropriety. "The Lord provides," she said instead, smoothing her apron. Lucas held up, his hand for quiet. There's more to do. We must appear before the judge in Gunnison to file the corrected deed. It's a 2-day journey by wagon. When do we leave? Mia asked softly. 3 days' time, Henry answered. I will meet you there to give testimony. The next days flew past in a whirlwind of preparation. Inside the cabin, the sisters worked with determined energy. Nettie May's iron hissed against their best dresses, pressing out wrinkles from storage. Rosabelle packed cornbread and salt pork for the journey, while Mia polished their worn boots until they gleamed. Lucas watched their industry from his forge, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. These women had brought life back to this land. Their courage deserved whatever protection he could offer. The morning of departure dawned clear and cool. They loaded the wagon with bedrolls and provisions, then gathered for morning prayer. Lucas's deep voice carried the familiar words across the yard. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The journey to Gunnison followed old hunting trails that wound through stands of aspen and pine. Lucas handled the reins with care, choosing the smoothest path for the sisters' comfort. Still, the wagon jolted over rocks and ruts, making conversation difficult. By late afternoon, they reached a wide stream bordered by cottonwoods. Lucas called a halt for the night, helping the sisters down from the wagon. While he and Nettie May set up camp, Rosabelle started a cook fire. Mia wandered to the stream's edge, drawn by the clear water's song. After seeking privacy behind a screen of willows, she let down her long brown hair and knelt to wash it in the cool current. Lucas, returning with firewood, caught a glimpse of her through the leaves, head bowed, water sparkling on her neck, humming softly to herself. Something in her quiet grace made his scarred hands tremble. He turned away quickly, chest tight with emotions he dared not name. That evening, they sat around the fire, sharing a simple meal. Stars emerged overhead as Rosabelle told stories about their father, making them laugh with memories of his stubborn pride in his daughters. He would be proud of you now, Lucas said quietly, fighting for your inheritance with such dignity. Mia's eyes met his across the flames, then dropped shyly away. But something passed between them in that moment, a spark of understanding, of possibility. They rose before dawn the next morning, eating a cold breakfast as they packed up camp. The second day's travel brought them into more settled country. Fenced pastures and occasional farmhouses appeared among the hills. By mid-morning, they reached Gunnison. The town bustled with miners, ranchers, and railway men. Lucas helped the sisters down from the wagon, noting how they straightened their spines against the curious stares of strangers. Henry waited for them outside the courthouse, his dark eyes calm. He had dressed formally in a clean white shirt and black vest. They climbed the wooden steps together, boots echoing in the quiet hall. The courtroom smelled of pine soap and dust. Morning light streamed through tall windows as they took their places. The judge, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, reviewed their documents carefully. Henry's testimony came first. He spoke with quiet dignity about the treaty his father had signed, about promises made and broken. When he finished, the judge nodded thoughtfully. Lucas stood next, explaining how he had married the sisters to protect their inheritance, how they had worked together to keep the ranch alive. His voice grew stronger as he described their determination and faith. The sisters sat straight-backed in their pressed dresses, hands folded properly in their laps. But Mia couldn't help reaching out to squeeze Lucas's arm when he returned to his seat. The judge took off his spectacles, polishing them slowly as he considered. The room held its breath. "The evidence is clear," he announced finally. "This land was granted in perpetual trust to both the Ute people and the Boone family settlers. The railroad's claim is hereby dismissed, and the deed shall be corrected to reflect the true ownership." Joy exploded in the courtroom. The sisters fell into each other's arms, crying and laughing at once. Lucas felt Henry's strong hand grip his shoulder in brotherhood. "The Lord is good," Nettie May kept saying through her tears. They practically floated down the courthouse steps into the bright afternoon. Henry bid them farewell with a dignified bow, promising to visit soon. The sisters hugged him impulsively, propriety forgotten in their happiness. The journey home seemed easier, lighter. As the wagon rolled through golden evening light, the sisters began to sing. Their voices rose sweet and clear in old hymns of praise. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me." Lucas didn't sing, but his heart lifted with the melody. He watched the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in glory. Beside him on the wagon seat, Mia's voice soared pure and true. When her hand brushed his arm, he didn't pull away. The familiar ridge appeared ahead, their home outlined against the sunset. They had done it, secured their land, protected their future. But Lucas knew something else had been secured as well, something tender and unexpected growing between these rough mountain walls. As they rolled into the yard, the last notes of their hymn faded into the evening air. They had won their case with honor, truth, and faith. Justice had prevailed, and hope bloomed like wildflowers after rain. Golden lamplight spilled from the ranch house windows into the deepening dusk. The aroma of venison stew drifted through the evening air, mingling with wood smoke from the cooking fire. Inside, the warmth of victory and homecoming filled every corner of the familiar room. Maya stood at the iron stove, stirring the rich stew with careful attention. Her cheeks were flushed from the heat, and wisps of hair had escaped her neat bun. The wooden spoon moved in slow circles as she added pinches of dried herbs from the bundles hanging overhead. At the long table, Nettie May arranged fresh-picked wildflowers in a blue ceramic pitcher. Her strong hands, usually rough from work, moved with surprising gentleness as she positioned purple lupins and bright yellow daisies. The flowers cast delicate shadows in the lamplight, like memories of spring dancing on the worn tablecloth. Rosabelle sat in the corner chair, her fiddle tucked under her chin. Her fingers moved carefully across the strings, testing each note as she tuned the instrument. The quiet plucks and gentle slides filled the peaceful silence between the domestic sounds of cooking and table setting. Lucas took his place at the head of the table, his broad shoulders relaxed for perhaps the first time since the wedding. The victory in court had lifted a weight from all of them, replacing uncertainty with belonging. He watched his unusual family move about their tasks, something tight in his chest slowly unwinding. Henry sat nearby, his dignified presence adding depth to their celebration. The Ute Scout's dark eyes held quiet satisfaction at justice served, at promises honored at last. "Supper's ready," Mia called softly, lifting the heavy pot from the stove with practiced care. Steam rose from the savory stew as she placed it on the table's iron trivet. They gathered around, standing behind their chairs as Lucas bowed his head to pray. His deep voice carried the weight of gratitude. "Lord, we thank you for this victory, for justice done and home preserved. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it, and thank you for—" He paused, his voice roughening slightly. "For giving me a family again." "Amen." "Amen," the sisters echoed, their voices harmonizing naturally as they took their seats. The meal was served with quiet joy, thick slices of fresh bread passing from hand to hand, bowls of stew steaming in the lamplight. The venison was tender, seasoned perfectly with herbs from Mia's garden. Even St. Peter the Crow, perched importantly on the mantel, seemed to watch the scene with approval. Conversation flowed easily, memories of the journey mixing with plans for tomorrow. Nettie May described how the judge had smiled when delivering his verdict. Rosabelle laughed about the way their wagon wheel had squeaked a tune all the way home. Henry shared stories of his grandfather's wisdom, speaking of the land as a living thing that remembered both wounds and healing. When the bowls were empty and the bread was gone, they stayed at the table, reluctant to break the spell of contentment. Rosabelle picked up her fiddle again, testing the strings one final time before launching into "Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing." Her bow moved smoothly across the strings as the familiar melody filled the room. Mia's clear voice joined first, then Nettie May's deeper alto. The harmony wrapped around them like a warm blanket as they sang, "Come, thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing, thy grace streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise." Henry clapped softly, keeping time with gentle precision. His weathered hands moved in perfect rhythm, adding texture to the music. Lucas didn't sing, but his foot tapped quietly under the table, and his eyes shone in the lamplight. Laughter bubbled up between verses, joy too full to contain spilling over into the music. It filled every corner of the room, chasing away old shadows of loneliness and grief. The crow added an occasional caw, making Rosabelle giggle without missing a note. When the song ended, Lucas stood quietly and stepped outside onto the porch. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and sage. Stars scattered across the dark sky like diamonds on velvet, more than any man could count. He leaned against the porch post, overwhelmed by the feeling in his chest. "Maybe this is what family feels like," he whispered to the listening night. The words felt strange on his tongue, hope mixing with wonder and a touch of fear at having so much to lose again. After a few moments, he returned inside to find Mia sitting in his mother's old rocking chair by the fire. His worn work shirt lay across her lap as she carefully mended a tear in the sleeve. The firelight caught golden glints in her brown hair and made her needle flash as it moved steadily in and out of the fabric. She looked up as he entered, their eyes meeting in the warm light. Something passed between them, unspoken but real as the ground beneath their feet. Understanding, perhaps, or possibility. Neither looked away until St. Peter broke the moment with a loud, approving caw. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes began their nightly chorus. The wild sound drifted through the darkness, reminding them that beyond their circle of lamplight, the frontier remained untamed and unpredictable. But tonight, that knowledge held no fear, only a deeper appreciation for the peace they'd found within these walls. The fire crackled softly as Mia's needle continued its patient work. Henry shared another quiet story about his people's ways. Nettie May mixed dough for tomorrow's bread, while Rosabelle played gentle tunes. Lucas sat in his chair, watching his family with eyes that had forgotten how to be lonely. St. Peter strutted along the mantel like a feathered guardian, occasionally preening his healing wing. The splints Lucas had made from kindling had done their work well. Soon the crow would fly again, though somehow they all knew he would choose to stay. Outside, the coyotes sang to the stars. Inside, lamplight glowed golden through the windows, marking this place as shelter, as home, as the center of something precious and new. A family built not from blood, but from choice, from faith, and from love that grew slow and strong like winter wheat beneath the snow. 2 nights after, their celebration, peace shattered like glass. The late hour wrapped the ranch in darkness, broken only by a waxing moon that cast long shadows across the sleeping land. Lucas jolted awake in his small room off the kitchen. Something was wrong. The air carried a familiar scent that made his heart stop. Smoke. Not the comforting smell of the cooking fire or the forge, but the acrid bite of destruction. His scarred back tingled with remembered pain as he threw off his blanket and grabbed his boots. Through the window, an orange glow painted the yard in hellish light. The barn, their barn, was burning. "Fire!" His shout filled the house as he ran for the door. "Everyone up! Fire in the barn!" Footsteps thundered above as the sisters woke. Lucas burst into the yard, the heat already reaching him like a furnace blast. Flames licked up the barn's wooden walls, consuming the dry timber with frightening speed. Inside, horses screamed in terror. "The animals!" Nettie Mae's voice cracked behind him. She stood in her nightdress, face pale in the firelight. Rosabelle and Mia crowded the doorway behind her, eyes wide with horror. Lucas didn't hesitate. "Get water. Form a line." He sprinted toward the inferno, his shirt pulled over his nose against the smoke. The barn door stuck. Someone had wedged it shut from the outside. He slammed his shoulder against it once, twice, splintering the wood. Inside was chaos. Smoke rolled across the ceiling in thick waves. 4 horses thrashed in their stalls, eyes rolling white with panic. Lucas's throat burned as he fought his way to the first stall. His fingers fumbled with the latch, finally freeing the terrified animal. It bolted past him into the night. "Lucas!" Henry's voice cut through the roar of flames. The Ute Scout appeared through the smoke like a spirit, his face streaked with soot. "The wagon! Help me!" Together they strained against the heavy wagon, pushing it toward the door as burning hay rained down around them. The wheels caught on something, a length of rope deliberately tied to block their path. Henry's knife flashed, cutting them free. Outside, the sisters had formed a bucket line from the well, passing water hand to hand. But it was like trying to fight a wildfire with dewdrops. The barn was already more flame than structure. St. Peter's harsh cry pierced the night. The crow circled frantically near the rafters, trapped by the rising flames. Lucas looked up, seeing the roof timbers glowing red-hot above them. "The last horse!" he shouted to Henry. "Get clear, I'll be right behind you!" Mia's scream cut through the chaos. "Lucas, no, please!" But he was already moving, pushing deeper into the inferno. The final horse stood trapped in its stall, kicking the walls in panic. Heat pressed against him like a physical weight. His lungs fought for clean air as he reached the stall door. The horse burst free at his touch, nearly trampling him in its desperation to escape. Lucas turned to follow. But a burning beam crashed down, blocking his path. Fire surrounded him now. Through the flames he saw Mia's face, illuminated by the blaze, her hand reaching toward him. Then the world exploded. The roof gave way with a thunderous crack. Burning timbers plunged downward as the barn collapsed in on itself. A wall of flame and smoke erupted skyward, carrying sparks and ash into the night sky. "Lucas!" The sisters' voices joined in a ragged chorus of grief. Henry held Mia back as she tried to run toward the flames. "Lucas!" But only the fire answered, roaring its victory to the stars. Hours crawled past like years. The flames gradually died down to sullen red coals that pulsed like dying hearts in the ruins. The sisters huddled together on the ground, tears cutting clean tracks through the soot on their faces. Henry stood guard nearby, his own grief evident in the set of his shoulders and the way his hands clenched at his sides. Dawn began to paint the eastern sky in pale colors that had no right to be so beautiful. The first fingers of light revealed the full extent of the destruction. Where the barn had stood was now only a smoking skeleton of blackened beams and ash. No sign remained of Lucas. Hoofbeats approached along the ridge road. The preacher appeared, his horse blowing hard from the steep climb. He dismounted slowly, removing his hat as he took in the scene. His lined face carried the weight of too many similar vigils, too many graves dug, and prayers spoken over tragedy. "I saw the flames from town," he said softly. "Came as quick as I could." Nettie May nodded, her arm tight around Mia's shoulders. Rosabelle knelt in the dirt, her hands clasped as if in prayer, but no words came. The sound of the approaching storm reached them first, a low rumble of thunder rolling across the mountains. Then the rain began to fall, fat drops hissing as they struck the hot coals. Steam rose from the ruins like the barn's departing spirit. Henry placed a gentle hand on Mia's shoulder. "He died saving others," he said in his quiet way, "as he lived." The rain fell harder now, soaking their clothes, mixing with tears. It drummed against the ground with the rhythm of a funeral march, nature's own tribute to the man who had given everything to protect those in his care. The preacher moved to stand beside them, his voice carrying above the storm. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." The familiar words washed over them like the rain, offering what comfort they could. But for the sisters who had finally found family, for Henry who had found a brother in spirit, the hollow place in their hearts remained. The rain continued to fall, but no amount of water could wash away their grief or restore what the flames had taken. St. Peter's mournful caw echoed once across the yard, then fell silent. The crow that Lucas had healed with his own hands now watched from the roof of the house, a dark sentinel over this scene of loss. In the growing light, smoke continued to rise from the ashes of the barn, carrying with it the dreams of the family that had only just begun to believe in happiness again. The rain fell steadily, hissing over the coals, as if trying to whisper secrets about life and death, about love and loss, about the cruel twists of fate that could turn joy to ashes in a single night. But if the rain held answers, they remained unspoken, lost in the sound of water striking earth and the soft weeping of those left behind. The rain continued for 3 days after the fire, as if heaven itself mourned their loss. Gray clouds hung low over Boone Ridge, turning the world into a somber painting of ash and shadow. On the 4th morning, when the deluge finally ceased, the sisters stood before the ruined barn, their boots sinking into mud dark as fresh-turned graves. "We need to save what we can," Nettie May said, her voice rough from crying. She gripped a shovel with white-knuckled hands. "Lucas would want us to rebuild." They worked in silence, sifting through the wreckage. The heat had warped metal and turned wood to carbon, but beneath a fallen beam, they found Lucas's anvil. The iron mass lay half buried in mud, its surface scarred by flame but still solid at its core. "Like him," Rosabelle whispered, touching the blackened metal. "Strong clear through." It took all 3 sisters and Henry to drag the anvil from the ruins. Henry's bandaged hands trembled with the effort, his burns from the rescue attempt still raw and weeping, but he refused to rest. "The fence needs mending," he insisted, his normally steady voice tight with pain. "Cattle will stray if we don't." Nettie May saw how he favored his right side, how blisters had raised white and angry across his forearms. "You should be resting, Henry." "No." He shook his head firmly. "Lucas would have done the same for me." They chose a spot near the forge stone to bury the anvil, marking where Lucas had stood so many mornings, teaching Nettie May the rhythm of hammer strikes. The earth was soft from rain, accepting the heavy iron like a final gift. Mia fashioned a cross from 2 pieces of salvaged timber, while Rosabelle carved Lucas's name with trembling hands. The simple marker stood stark against the clouded sky. 4 figures bowed their heads, as the preacher's wife spoke words of comfort, her Bible open despite the threatening drizzle. But comfort felt as distant as the hidden sun. That evening, as shadows gathered like old sorrows, Nettie May found herself drawn to the house's small library shelf. Among the few books, she spotted Lucas's personal Bible, its leather cover blackened at the edges where he'd rescued it from his mountain cabin fire years ago. The pages fell open naturally to Isaiah, and her breath caught at the words before her. To give unto them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. She traced the verse with her finger, remembering how Lucas had read scripture each evening, his deep voice gentle as summer rain. Tears blurred her vision, but something stirred in her heart. Not peace, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin. Purpose. "Sisters," she called softly, "come see what I've found." They gathered in the parlor, holding candles against the gathering dark. Mia's hands shook as she lifted Rosabelle's fiddle from its case, the instrument somehow spared by the fire's fury. She hadn't played since that terrible night, but now her fingers found the strings with hesitant grace. "Play Amazing Grace," Rosabelle whispered. It was his favorite. The melody rose uncertain at first, like a bird testing injured wings. But as Mia played, strength seemed to flow into her hands. The notes grew surer, filling the room with their bittersweet testimony. Nettie May began to read aloud from Isaiah, her voice joining the music in a duet of grief and hope. "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord hath anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek." They stayed up long into the night, reading passages Lucas had marked, sharing memories of his quiet strength. When sleep finally claimed them, it was gentler than it had been since the fire. Dawn broke the next morning with surprising clarity. The sisters stood in the yard, surveying the work ahead. Henry had already started sorting timber, his movements careful but determined despite his injuries. "We'll need to clear this whole area," he explained, indicating the charred debris. "Start fresh with a strong foundation." Nettie May picked up a hammer, its weight familiar from Lucas's lessons. "Then let's begin." They worked through the morning, their hands growing surer with each beam moved, each nail driven. The labor was hard, but it gave their grief somewhere to go, transforming sorrow into sweat and purpose. Even Mia, usually shy of physical work, threw herself into the task with quiet intensity. Near midday, a familiar sound broke their concentration. A harsh caw echoed across the yard, and there, perched on the remaining fence post, sat St. Peter. The crow's feathers were singed, his proud tail nearly bare, but his bright eyes held the same fierce life as ever. "Lord have mercy," Rosabelle breathed, dropping her armload of timber. "He made it through!" The bird hopped closer, favoring one leg but still mobile. Just as Lucas had once healed the crow's broken wing, the creature had somehow survived the inferno. Mia knelt slowly, tears streaming down her face as St. Peter pecked gently at her outstretched hand. "If he can survive," she said softly, "so can we." The crow's return seemed to break something loose in all of them. Grief remained, deep and real as the earth beneath their feet, but now it flowed like spring melt instead of freezing them in place. They worked with renewed vigor, St. Peter watching from various perches, occasionally offering commentary on their efforts. Henry showed them how to test wood for soundness, how to square corners true and level. Though his burns pained him visibly, he never complained. When Nettie May insisted he rest, he simply shook his head. "Lucas taught me about friendship," he said quietly. "About being a brother. I won't dishonor that teaching." They salvaged what they could from the ruins. Hinges, nails straightened with patient hands, pieces of timber that had somehow escaped the worst of the flames. Each saved item felt like a small victory over destruction, a tiny piece of Lucas's legacy preserved. As the sun began to set, they gathered once more in the yard. Rosabelle had found candles in the house, and they lit them carefully, creating a circle of light in the growing dusk. The flames danced, so different from the savage fire that had taken Lucas. These were gentle, hopeful, like the light they'd seen in his eyes when he spoke of faith. Mia lifted the fiddle again, and this time her hands were steady as she played. The hymn rose sweet and clear in the evening air, and if they listened carefully, they could almost hear Lucas's deep voice humming along, could almost feel his presence in the quiet spaces between notes. St. Peter added his voice to the song, his harsh caw softening into something almost musical. The crow hopped closer to the circle of candlelight, his damaged feathers catching the glow like promises of renewal. They stood together in that gentle light, 4 people and a bird, united by loss but strengthened by something greater. The charred Bible verse echoed in their hearts. Beauty for ashes, joy for mourning, praise for heaviness. Not yet, perhaps, but the promise was there, as real as the hammer in Nettie May's hands, as true as the melody from Mia's fiddle, as lasting as the love that had brought them together. The candlelight vigil stretched long into the night, their shadows moving like dancers against the new-sawn timber. They took turns reading from Scripture, voices growing stronger with each passage. When words failed, the music spoke for them, and when music wasn't enough, silence held them in its peaceful embrace. Hope, they were learning, could grow in the most unlikely soil, like the crow's singed feathers that would eventually molt and renew, like the timber they would raise toward heaven, like the love that had bloomed brief but bright in their midst. Beauty would rise again from these ashes. They would make sure of it, together. The morning mist lay thick across Boone Ridge, turning familiar shapes into ghostly shadows. Dawn's first light had barely begun to filter through when the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the stillness. The sisters paused in their work, tools suspended mid-motion as they listened. Through the pearly haze, 2 riders emerged. Henry Nez sat straight in his saddle despite his bandaged arms, but it was the second figure that made the women's hearts stop. Broad-shouldered and familiar, streaked with soot and favoring his left side, Lucas Boone rode home. Nettie May's hammer struck the ground with a thud. Rosabelle's saw clattered against fresh-cut timber. Mia's hands flew to her mouth, a strangled cry escaping her lips. For one breathless moment they stood frozen, afraid that speaking might shatter what surely must be a dream. Then Lucas swung down from his horse, stumbling slightly, and reality crashed over them like a wave. They ran to him as one, their sobs of relief echoing across the yard. Their hands touched his arms, his shoulders, his face. Solid, warm, alive. "The Lord is merciful," Lucas said, his voice rough with emotion. "Some Ute herders found me by the creek. I'd crawled far as I could, trying to get back to you all." Henry dismounted carefully, wincing at the pull of his burns. "They brought word to me 3 days ago. Lucas needed time to heal enough for the ride home." The sisters couldn't stop touching Lucas, as if afraid he might vanish again. His clothes were torn and smoke-stained, his face gaunt from the ordeal, but his eyes held the same steady light they remembered. St. Peter swooped down from his perch, landing on Lucas's shoulder with a welcoming caw. Word spread through Silver Mercy like wildfire. By mid-morning, townspeople began arriving in wagons and on horseback, drawn by the miracle of Lucas's return. They gathered in the yard, murmuring and pointing, some wiping away tears of their own. The preacher stood before them all, his Bible held high. "Behold," he declared, his voice carrying across the crowd, "how the Lord rewards faithful hearts. This is proof that faith can move mountains or bring a man back from death's door." Lucas shook his head humbly. "The Lord worked through many hands," he said. Then he turned to Henry, gripping his friend's arm with deep emotion. "This man is my brother," he announced to all assembled. "Not by blood, but by the bonds of trust and courage. I owe him my life twice over now." Henry ducked his head, embarrassed by the attention, but clearly moved. The crowd's murmurs turned thoughtful, seeing the friendship between white man and Ute in a new light. As the sun climbed higher, the visitors gradually departed, leaving the family to their private joy. By evening, they gathered on the partially rebuilt porch, sharing a simple meal of cornbread and coffee. The coffee was strong and hot, the cornbread fresh from the oven, simple things that now tasted of celebration. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the forge's first new flame dance in the gathering dusk. Lucas had insisted on lighting it himself, though his movements were still stiff with pain. The familiar red glow seemed to welcome him home, casting warm light across their faces. "I heard you all," Lucas said finally, his voice soft. "While I was trying to find my way back, I heard the fiddle playing, and your prayers." He looked at each of them in turn, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You've made this place live again, made it more than just land and timber." Rosabelle reached for his hand. "We learned from you," she whispered. Lucas smiled, the expression transforming his scarred face. "Rosabelle mentioned something, that first day in town, about giving you sons." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "But you already gave me sons, through the life you made here, through your courage and faith when I was gone." The women smiled through their tears, understanding the depth of what he was saying. Family wasn't always about blood or birth. Sometimes it grew from shared trials, from faith tested in fire, from love that chose to endure. The forge's flame crackled softly, sending sparks up into the darkening sky like prayers of thanksgiving. St. Peter preened his healing feathers nearby, while Henry quietly hummed a Ute melody of homecoming. They sat together, these unlikely kin, bound by something stronger than law or custom, bound by love that had survived the flames and emerged transformed, like steel in the forge's fire. 1 year passed like a dream on Three Sisters Ridge. The old Richards Ranch had transformed into something none of them could have imagined that first awkward day of the triple wedding. The forge's smoke rose steady against the mountain sky, marking where Lucas and Nettie May now taught their growing school of students. Women from town and Ute girls from the agency worked side by side at the anvils, learning to shape metal into tools and art. Their hammers rang out in rhythm while inside the cabin, voices lifted in prayer and song as Mia led scripture readings. Her belly had grown round with promise, and her gentle ways drew people from both communities together. Rosabelle managed the ranch books now, working closely with Henry Nez to expand their horse training program. The Ute Scout had become family in truth, his quiet wisdom helping bridge old divisions. Even St. Peter had taken to following him around, sometimes perching on his shoulder during morning chores. When the first snow began to fall that December morning, it came as soft as grace. Large flakes drifted down, catching the light from the forge where Lucas worked. Inside, Mia's labor had started just before dawn. The sisters and the local midwife attended her while Lucas paced outside, wearing a path in the gathering snow. Near sunset, a baby's cry split the winter silence. Lucas rushed inside to find Mia propped up on pillows, tears of joy streaming down her face as she held their son. The child was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the mountains. They gathered around the forge that evening, its warmth keeping the December chill at bay. Lucas cradled his newborn son with careful hands, lifting him toward the firelight. "You're proof that mercy can start anywhere," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. The baby cooed, reaching up toward his father's scarred face without fear. From silver mercy below, church bells began to ring, their clear tones carrying through the crisp air. The Ute choir had come up from the agency, bearing gifts and songs. They formed a circle in the yard, their voices rising in a hymn of gratitude that blended English words with ancient harmonies. Snow continued to fall, dusting everything in white. The cabin glowed with lamplight and love, smoke curling from its chimney into the darkening sky. Against the pure white of the mountains, the family stood together. Lucas and Mia with their newborn, Nettie Mae and Rosabelle, Henry in his place of honor. Their faces shone with joy that had been hard won through fire and faith. Above them all, St. Peter wheeled in wide circles, his dark wings strong against the winter sky. His cries echoed off the ridges, as if announcing to heaven itself that here, on this mountain, mercy had made its home. Here, where an unlikely family had found each other, love had grown strong enough to heal old wounds and bridge ancient divides. The baby's soft coos mingled with the hymn's final notes, a perfect harmony of hope fulfilled. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.